The world had been bleached of all color, leaving only the stark, blinding white of the snow and the bruised, iron gray of the sky. For 3 days, Roker had walked this desolate landscape, a solitary, fur-clad figure against the immense, frozen emptiness of the great ice plains. The wind, his only companion, was a ceaseless tormentor. It was a physical entity, a predator of heat, that gnawed at the edges of his hide wrappings, whispering threats of a cold, silent death into his ears. Each breath was a sharp, painful intake of frozen air that seemed to crystallize in his lungs. He was a ghost in a world of ghosts. The land itself was a skeleton, its flesh of grass and soil long since devoured by the relentless winter. The skeletal fingers of ancient, gnarled trees clawed at the oppressive sky, their branches coated in a thick armor of ice. Below his feet, the snow lay in deep, treacherous drifts, concealing crevasses that could swallow a man whole and leave no trace. Roker moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, his senses honed by a lifetime of survival in this unforgiving world. His eyes, narrowed to slits against the glare, constantly scanned the horizon, searching for the faintest sign, the slightest disturbance in the uniform whiteness. He was hunting the great ones, the mammoths, back in the cave, nestled in the sheltered embrace of a rocky cliff face. His people were starving. The last of the dried meat was gone. The marrow had been scraped from the last of the bones, and the gnawing hunger that had been a dull ache was now a sharp, constant pain in the belly of every man, woman, and child. The hunters had returned empty-handed day after day, their faces grim, their spirits as frozen as the landscape. The smaller game, the deer, the wild boar, the giant cave bears had either migrated to less hostile lands or had burrowed deep into their dens, waiting out the fury of the winter. Only the mammoths remained, the great, shaggy mountains of flesh and fur, whose thunderous tread could shake the very foundations of the earth. They were the ultimate prize, a single kill promising enough meat to feed the clan for weeks, enough hide to fashion new shelters and warmer clothes, enough bone to create new tools and weapons. But they were also the ultimate challenge. Hunting a mammoth was a dance with death, a desperate gamble that required immense courage, skill, and more than a little luck. It was a task usually undertaken by a full party of hunters, a coordinated effort of spears and shouts and carefully laid traps. But there was no time for that. Desperation had driven them to a desperate act. Roker, the strongest and most skilled of their hunters, had volunteered to go alone. He had seen the fear in the eyes of his mate, Lyra, as she stitched a new layer of fur onto his tunic. He had felt the small, trusting hand of his daughter, Nia, slip into his as he prepared to leave, her large, dark eyes silently pleading with him to return. The weight of their survival, the survival of his entire clan, rested on his broad, weary shoulders. He paused, crouching behind a snow-laden rock, and pulled a small, leather pouch from his belt. Inside were a few precious, dried berries, their sweetness a ghost on his tongue. He chewed them slowly, savoring the meager burst of energy they provided. As he ate, his eyes never stopped moving, reading the story of the land. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible tracks of a snow fox, the delicate lacework of its paws a reminder that he was not entirely alone in this desolate world. He saw the way the wind had sculpted the snow into long, sweeping dunes, and he knew from their shape and direction that a storm was coming. He had to find the mammoths before the storm hit. He had been following their trail for 3 days, a faint but unmistakable path of crushed snow and frozen dung. The herd was large, he knew, from the sheer breadth of their trail, and they were moving slowly, conserving their energy against the cold. This gave him hope. A large herd would have young ones, and a young mammoth separated from its mother was his only realistic chance. He pressed on, his body a symphony of protesting muscles and aching joints. The cold was a constant, insidious presence, a venom that seeped into his bones, making his movements stiff and clumsy. He had to keep moving. To stop was to die. As the sun, a pale, indifferent disk in the sky, began its slow descent towards the horizon, The wind began to pick up, its mournful howl rising in pitch and intensity. The first flakes of snow, small and hard as grains of sand, began to fall, stinging his exposed cheeks. The storm was coming, and it was coming fast. Panic, cold and sharp as an icicle, pricked at the edges of his resolve. To be caught in a blizzard on the open plain was a death sentence. He scanned the landscape with a new urgency, his eyes searching for any sign of shelter. He saw it then, a dark, jagged line against the white horizon, a ridge of rock, a spine of the earth breaking through the snowy flesh of the tundra. It was his only hope. With the last of his strength, he stumbled towards the rocks, the wind now a furious physical blow against his back, pushing him, goading him. The snow was falling thick and fast now, a swirling white vortex that reduced visibility to a few feet. He could no longer see the rocks, but he kept moving in the direction he had last seen them, his mind a maelstrom of fear and determination. He almost missed it. A dark opening at the base of the rock face, a shallow cave, barely more than a hollow. It was small and it was dark, but it was shelter. He scrambled inside, collapsing onto the frozen ground, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The cave was not deep, but it offered a respite from the relentless wind. He fumbled in his pack, his fingers numb and clumsy, and pulled out his fire-starting kit. A piece of flint, a chunk of pyrite, and a small pouch of dried moss. With painstaking care, he struck the flint against the pyrite, sending a shower of sparks into the moss. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a tiny wisp of smoke curled upwards, followed by a faint, orange glow. He gently blew on the ember, nurturing it, coaxing it, until a small flame flickered to life. He fed the flame with twigs and dried roots he had gathered earlier, his foresight a gift from 1,000 generations of survivors. The fire grew, a small, defiant sun in the darkness of the cave, its warmth a blessing against the frigid air. The fire did more than warm his body. It warmed his spirit. It was a symbol of life, of hope, of defiance against the crushing power of the winter. As the blizzard raged outside, a symphony of howling wind and drumming snow, Roker sat by his fire, his spear resting against the cave wall. He thought of his clan, huddled together in their own cave, their own fire a beacon of hope in the darkness. He thought of Lyra and Nia, and a fierce, protective love burned in his chest, a fire far hotter than the one that crackled before him. He would not fail them. He ate the last of his berries, their sweetness a bittersweet reminder of the task that still lay ahead. He checked the point of his spear, a masterpiece of sharpened flint lashed to a sturdy wooden shaft. It was his only weapon, an extension of his own will, his own determination. He slept fitfully, his dreams a chaotic mix of swirling snow, thundering mammoths, and the trusting eyes of his daughter. He woke to a world transformed. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a pristine, untouched blanket of white. The silence was profound, a vast, echoing emptiness that seemed to stretch to the very edges of the world. He emerged from the cave, his body stiff, his muscles aching, but his mind clear and focused. The air was colder than before, but the wind had died down, and the sun, though still pale, seemed to hold a hint of warmth, a promise of life. He found the mammoth trail again, their tracks now partially filled with fresh snow. But they were still there, a clear path leading north. He knew he was close. He could feel it in the air, a subtle shift, a sense of anticipation. He walked for hours, his senses on high alert. And then he saw them. They were magnificent, a herd of at least 20, their massive bodies covered in thick, shaggy coats of brown and auburn fur. They moved with a slow, ponderous grace, their great, curved tusks sweeping through the snow as they searched for the frozen grasses and lichens that lay buried beneath. The ground trembled with their passing. Roker dropped to his belly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He crawled forward, using the natural contours of the land, the scattered rocks and snowdrifts, as cover. He moved with the patient stealth of a predator, his every movement slow and deliberate. He studied the herd, his hunter's eye assessing each animal. There was a massive bull, its tusks long and wickedly curved, its head held high in a posture of dominance. There was a matriarch, her wise, ancient eyes surveying her family with a watchful gaze. And there were the young ones, their playful antics a stark contrast to the grim reality of the world around them. He knew he could not take the bull. It was too big, too strong, too dangerous. The matriarch, too, was out of the question. She was the heart of the herd, and the others would defend her with their lives. His best chance was a young male, one that was old enough to provide a substantial amount of meat but young enough to be less experienced, less wary. He found his target. A young bull, standing at the edge of the herd, slightly separated from the others. It was still a formidable creature, its shoulders as high as Roker's head, its tusks already beginning to show the curve of maturity. But it was his best, his only chance. He spent the rest of the day observing, learning the rhythm of the herd, the patterns of their movement. He watched as the young bull wandered away from the others, his youthful curiosity leading him to explore a patch of skeletal trees. This was his opportunity. He needed a plan. To attack on the open plain would be suicide. The herd would stampede, and he would be crushed under their massive feet. He needed to use the terrain to his advantage. He scanned the landscape, his mind racing. And then he saw it. A deep, narrow ravine, its edges hidden by snowdrifts. If he could somehow drive the young bull towards the ravine, he might be able to trap it, to separate it from the protection of the herd. It was a risky plan, a desperate gamble. But desperation was the currency of this world. As dusk began to fall, casting long purple shadows across the snow, Roker began his move. He circled around the herd, his movements as silent as the falling snow. He positioned himself behind the young bull, the wind in his favor, carrying his scent away from the herd. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He clutched his spear, its familiar weight a comfort in his hand. He thought of Lyra and Nia, of the hungry faces of his clan. He was their hope. He was their ghost in the wind. He rose from his crouch, a silent, deadly specter against the snow. He let out a sharp, piercing cry, a sound that was both human and animal, a sound that cut through the silence of the tundra like a shard of flint. The young bull started, its head jerking up, its eyes wide with alarm. It looked around, confused, trying to locate the source of the sound. Roker shouted again, this time waving his arms, making himself a bigger, more threatening presence. The bull, startled and unsure, began to move, and it was moving in the right direction, towards the ravine. The rest of the herd, alerted by the commotion, began to stir, their deep, rumbling calls echoing across the plain. The matriarch turned her massive head, her intelligent eyes fixing on the small, fur-clad figure that was harassing her young. A low, menacing growl rumbled in her chest. Roker's heart pounded. He was no longer a ghost. He was a target. But he held his ground, his eyes locked on the young bull, his mind focused on the plan. He had to keep it moving to push it towards the trap. He was no longer just a hunter. He was a force of nature, a small, insignificant creature daring to challenge the giants of the Ice Age. The fate of his people, the future of his clan, would be decided in the next few moments, in this desolate, frozen corner of the world. The hunt had begun. The matriarch's warning cry was a deep, resonant blast that tore through the frigid air, a command and a threat in one. The herd responded instantly, their massive bodies forming a protective wall around the younger, more vulnerable members. But Roker's target, the young bull, was already in motion, spooked by the sudden predatory appearance of the lone human. It trotted away from the safety of the herd, its movements clumsy with fear, its path taking it directly towards the hidden ravine. This was the moment, the knife edge on which survival balanced. Roker broke into a run, his legs pumping, his lungs burning. He was no longer a stealthy stalker but a driver, a herder of giants. He screamed, a raw, primal sound torn from the depths of his being, and waved his spear, making himself seem larger, more ferocious than he was. He had to keep the young bull's attention focused on him, to prevent it from turning back to the herd. The ground trembled as the matriarch took a step forward. Her immense head lowered, her tusks glinting in the fading light. She was a mountain of angry flesh, a force of nature about to be unleashed. Roker knew that if she charged, it would all be over. He had only a few heartbeats. The young bull, caught between the terrifying figure of the hunter and the angry calls of its matriarch, chose the path of least resistance. It broke into a clumsy gallop, its massive feet churning up clouds of snow, its trajectory a straight line towards the ravine. Success, a jolt of adrenaline, fierce and triumphant, surged through Roker. He had done it. He had separated his prey. He veered away, his own path now taking him along the edge of the ravine, a parallel course to the panicked bull. The ground beneath the beast's thundering hooves began to crumble. The bull let out a squeal of terror as the snow-covered ledge gave way. With a great, tearing sound of earth and ice, it tumbled head over heels into the ravine, its massive body crashing against the frozen rock walls before coming to a rest at the bottom. A cloud of snow and ice crystals billowed up from the ravine, followed by an eerie silence. The herd, seeing one of their own disappear, fell silent, their anger replaced by a palpable sense of confusion and fear. The matriarch stood at the edge of the ravine, her deep, mournful calls echoing in the twilight, a lament for her fallen kin. Roker did not pause to celebrate. He knew this was just the beginning. The bull was trapped, but it was far from dead. He scrambled down the steep, treacherous slope of the ravine, his feet finding purchase on the jagged rocks, his spear held ready. The bull was struggling to its feet, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. A shard of bone protruded from its thick, hairy hide. It was wounded, but its eyes burned with a mixture of pain and fury. As Roker approached, it let out a roar of defiance and tried to charge, but its injured leg collapsed beneath it. Roker felt a pang of something akin to pity. This was a magnificent creature, a life force of immense power and vitality, now brought low by a trick, a trap. But pity was a luxury he could not afford. The faces of his starving family, of his trusting daughter, flashed in his mind. He was a hunter. This was his purpose. He approached with caution, circling the wounded beast, his spear held in a two-handed grip. The bull watched him, its head swinging from side to side, its great tusks a formidable defense even in its crippled state. Roker knew that a direct frontal assault would be suicide. He had to be patient. He had to wait for an opening. The bull, in its pain and frustration, thrashed its head, its tusks gouging deep furrows in the frozen ground. It was a display of raw, untamed power, a reminder of the danger he still faced. Roker feinted to the left, and as the bull swung its massive head to meet the perceived threat, he lunged to the right, his spear a blur of motion. He drove the sharpened flint point deep into the bull's flank, behind the massive shoulder blade, aiming for the heart and lungs that lay within. The bull roared, a sound of pure agony, and thrashed wildly, its massive body convulsing. The spear was torn from Roker's grasp, the shaft snapping like a twig. Roker scrambled back, his heart pounding. The bull was grievously wounded, a stream of dark, hot blood steaming in the cold air, staining the snow a deep, vibrant red. But it was still alive, still dangerous. It struggled to its feet again, its eyes, now clouded with pain, fixed on Roker with a burning hatred. It lunged, a final, desperate act of defiance. Roker, weaponless, threw himself to the side, tumbling over the frozen ground, the bull's tusks missing him by inches. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. He needed a weapon. His eyes fell on the broken shaft of his spear, its jagged end a makeshift dagger. He grabbed the broken shaft and charged, his fear replaced by a cold, deadly resolve. The bull, weakened by its wound and its final, desperate lunge, had collapsed onto its side, its breath coming in great, ragged gasps. Roker did not hesitate. He threw himself onto the beast's massive back, his legs straddling its heaving flank, and drove the jagged end of the spear shaft into the soft flesh of its neck. Again and again, a grim, bloody rhythm of survival. The great beast shuddered, a final, convulsive tremor, and then was still. The only sound in the ravine was the harsh, ragged sound of Roker's own breathing and the soft, mournful calls of the herd on the plain above. He had done it. He slid off the mammoth's body, his own body trembling with a mixture of exhaustion, adrenaline, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. He stood for a moment, looking at the great, still form, the reddened snow, the steam rising from the cooling body. He had taken a life to save the lives of his people. It was the brutal, unchangeable law of this world. He knew he could not linger. The scent of blood would travel on the wind, a siren call to every predator in the region. The dire wolves, the saber-toothed cats, the cave hyenastae would all be coming for their share of the prize. He pulled his flint knife from his belt and set to work. The task was monumental. The mammoth's hide was thick and tough, its muscles dense and powerful. His small knife seemed a pitiful tool against such a colossal creature. But he worked with a practiced efficiency, his hands, though numb with cold, moving with a sure, steady purpose. He cut out the heart and the liver, the most nutritious parts, and wrapped them in a piece of hide. He carved off great slabs of meat from the haunches and the back, his knife a blur of motion. It was a race against time, a race against the encroaching darkness and the hungry predators that lurked in the shadows. As he worked, he heard a low growl from the ridge above. He looked up and saw them, a pair of yellow eyes, glowing in the darkness. A saber-toothed cat, its massive fangs a promise of a swift, brutal death. Roker's blood ran cold. He was exhausted, armed only with a small knife and a broken spear. He was no match for the great cat. He grabbed a large chunk of meat and threw it up onto the plain, away from the ravine. The cat, its eyes fixed on the easy meal, disappeared from the ridge. Roker knew it was a temporary reprieve. He had to leave. Now, he could not carry all the meat. It was an impossible task. He had to take what he could, the most precious, life-giving parts. He fashioned a makeshift sledge from a large piece of the mammoth's hide, piling the meat and the heart and liver onto it. He tied a rope of twisted sinew to the sledge and began the arduous task of dragging it up the steep, icy slope of the ravine. It was a Herculean effort. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burned, his body ached with 1,000 different pains. But he kept going, his mind fixed on the image of his family, his clan. He finally reached the top of the ravine, his body trembling, his spirit on the verge of collapse. He did not rest. He began the long, slow journey back to his cave, dragging his precious cargo behind him, leaving a trail of blood and exhaustion on the pristine white snow. The journey back was a blur of pain and determination. He walked through the night, the stars his only guide, the weight of the sledge a constant, agonizing drag on his body. He was no longer a hunter. He was a beast of burden, a slave to the survival of his people. He walked for what seemed like an eternity, his mind a numb, empty void. He was running on pure, unadulterated will, a primal instinct to survive, to provide, to return home. As the first, faint hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, he saw it. A thin wisp of smoke, rising into the cold, still air. The smoke from his clan's fire. He was home. A cry went up from the lookout perched on the cliff face. A cry of disbelief, of hope, of joy. The clan poured out of the cave, their faces a mixture of awe and relief. They saw him, a lone, staggering figure, dragging a mountain of meat behind him. Lyra was the first to reach him. She said nothing, her eyes filled with tears, her hands tracing the lines of exhaustion on his face. He collapsed into her arms. The weight of his burden, both physical and emotional, finally lifted. They carried him into the cave, a hero returning from the wilderness. They tended to his wounds, they wrapped him in warm furs, they placed a piece of roasted mammoth heart in his hand. As he sat by the fire, the warmth seeping into his weary bones. He watched his daughter, Nia, her belly full for the first time in weeks, her eyes shining with a love and admiration that was more nourishing than any food. He had faced the ghost of the wind, he had danced with death, he had brought life back to his people. He was Roker, the mammoth hunter, and he had saved them all. The winter would still rage outside, but in the heart of the cave, there was warmth, there was food, and there was hope. And for now, that was enough.